If there's one thing humans can be relied upon to do, it is come up with more and more ingenious ways of killing or maiming each other. In pursuit of this goal, many horrific weapons have been created, and in today's episode, we're going to take a look at some of them. Although you might think that the military burying things in the ground to provide an unwelcome surprise to anyone trying to cross that ground might be a comparatively new development in the history of warfare, dangerous things that you might step on have been around for thousands of years. They just didn't explode. One such example is the Cowtrop. So, what was it, and how did it work? Believed to have been used by the Persian forces of Darius III against those of Alexander the Great back in 331 BCE during the Battle of Gaugamela, the Cowtrop, although not immediately deadly, was an absolutely savage piece of equipment. Consisting of 4 metal spikes joined together in such a way that however it was placed, there would always be one spike pointing upwards. These could be quickly scattered or sometimes buried across any battlefield to slow down the advances of foot soldiers or cavalry. Not only would these spikes cause major inconvenience to anyone unfortunate enough to step on one, they also came complete with a large barb that prevented them from being removed without causing catastrophic damage to the victim. Attempting to simply yank them free would result in muscle, bone, and tendons being torn away with them. Back then, of course, field surgery was, shall we say, slightly less advanced than it is today. So, if you were unfortunate enough to be impaled on one of these devices, you would almost certainly need to have your foot amputated. In the days before anesthesia or fancy things like clean operating instruments, the likelihood of dying from severe infection or even from shock was incredibly high. If you were a cavalryman whose horse was unfortunate enough to step on one of these during a full charge, your prospects were almost equally bleak. Although the Persians are usually credited with bringing these evil things onto the battlefield for the first time, they were more widely used during the reign of the Roman Empire. Around the middle of the Bronze Age, a new and terrifying tool appeared on the battlefield, the khopesh. Although closely associated with Egyptian history, the khopesh was first invented by the Syrians, who used the weapon against the Egyptians. Having suffered a terrible defeat, largely attributed to the effectiveness of this new weapon, the Egyptians adopted the design and ran with it. Combining aspects of both a battle axe and a sword, the khopesh had a short wooden handle and a curved sickle-like blade. Although the design of the blade changed somewhat over the years, early versions had a fairly straight blade that curved at the ends, whereas later versions had a more uniform curve. However, the concept remained largely the same. The outside of the blade was honed to a razor-sharp edge, allowing the user to deliver incredibly powerful strokes without too much physical effort, something that would have been a genuine benefit during a long battle. But that was only one of its advantages over more traditional weapons. It didn't stop there. With the correct training, its wielder could reverse the stroke and use the hook to lock up an opponent's blade during hand-to-hand combat, jerking it from their grasp, or even do the same with a shield. In fact, the khopesh was so groundbreaking that it transcended the battlefield and became something of an icon of the times. Want to make the slightly underwhelming pharaoh of the day look all powerful and serious? No problem, just make sure your artwork depicts him holding a khopesh. In fact, if artwork from the time is to be believed, even the gods were fans of this cutting-edge technology. It appears that it was a weapon of choice for the journey to the afterlife as well. Many of those important enough to have burial vaults or pyramids took one with them after their death. Tutankhamun was such a fan that he took 2 of them. Although the khopesh did eventually fall out of favor, during its prime, it helped the Egyptians to become an almost unstoppable force. The Obsidian Club, or macoatl, was a handheld weapon used by the Aztecs in battle. Unlike the weapons that we've mentioned so far, it required very little in the way of manufacturing skill. It was basically the ancient equivalent of a baseball bat filled with nails. The club itself was made of wood, about 70 centimeters in length, with one flat edge. Although this, in and of itself, would probably have made a fairly effective weapon, the Aztecs made a notable modification. Over time, they discovered that obsidian, or black glass, could be sharpened into exceptionally effective cutting blades. These blades could then be used for anything from cutting meat to performing ritual sacrifices, which we guess is pretty much the same thing, or attaching to a macoatl to make it even more devastating than it already was. If you were hit by one of these, you would not only sustain blunt force trauma, broken ribs, severe bruising, internal bleeding, etc., but also potentially life-ending lacerations. Seriously, we cannot overstate the awesome power of this weapon. Over the years, it has been claimed more than once that a skilled macoatl user could kill a horse with a single stroke. It really does show that you don't have to be an exceptional metalworker to create a truly horrific weapon. Up until now, the weapons that we've talked about have been both old and suited for close quarters combat. Sadly, as the human race progresses, so does our ability to kill and maim one another. Few weapons have proved to be as singularly devastating as the cluster bomb. The origin of the cluster bomb can be traced back to the 1930s, when munitions experts employed by the Soviet Union first developed early concepts. However, it wasn't until the Second World War that this devastating technology was used in combat. They were first deployed by Soviet forces in an attempt to destroy large numbers of German tanks. But what exactly is a cluster bomb? Well, according to humanityandinclusion.com, quote, a cluster munition or cluster bomb is a container filled with small explosive bombs called submunitions. This container may be a shell, rocket, missile, or other device. Dropped from an aircraft or fired from the ground, it opens in the air and releases the submunitions. This scatters a carpet of bombs over a large area without any degree of accuracy. The blanket coverage provided by these weapons has made them the go-to option for many military forces wishing to clear large areas of vehicles or personnel with minimal effort. In addition to their wide-scale slaughtering capabilities, cluster bombs also have other applications. For example, if your objective is to render an enemy airfield unusable, dropping a conventional bomb onto a runway might create one large crater, which can be filled quickly. However, if a cluster bomb is used, it has the potential to create many smaller craters, making the damage take considerably longer to repair. Unfortunately, their usage has rarely been confined to such applications. More often than not, they have been used indiscriminately to guarantee the destruction of much smaller targets, which could have been destroyed with a single attack from a more conventional bomb or missile. Over the years, many people, usually those with a politician's lack of forward thinking, have adopted the all is fair in love and war policy and continued to use these insane devices. Even if we accept that somewhat questionable premise, the main problem with cluster munitions is not just that many innocent people run the risk of being killed or maimed during an attack, but that submunitions have an annoying tendency to turn up long after the end of the conflict in which they were used. Broadly speaking, there are three ways in which these devices can be triggered: on impact, time detonation, or, and this is the most problematic version, by movement. Put simply, any movement-triggered submunition has the potential to remain dormant for years, if not decades, until it is disturbed. In places such as Cambodia and Laos, where the United States Air Force dropped hundreds of thousands of these tiny bombs, it is not uncommon for people to sustain fatal or life-changing injuries, even to this day. Imagine, if you will, that you're a German soldier during World War II. Although towards the end of the war this wasn't a particularly enviable position, at the moment you're feeling pretty safe. You see, you just had the good fortune to be ensconced in a concrete bunker. Although you can hear the bombs falling outside, there's no way they can penetrate your cocoon of safety. While your faith in the concrete structure is warranted, your belief in your personal safety is not. After one final explosion, everything goes quiet. That's it, you think to yourself. I made it. After a few moments, you become aware that the temperature inside your bomb-proof bunker is rising, not just in the way that any small space heats up when filled with warm bodies, but it's getting really, really hot. Before you have a chance to escape, the temperature increases causes you and your comrades to lose consciousness, and by the time you finally discovered, you have been baked alive. That's right. Napalm just arrived at the battlefield.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Although napalm became a catch-all term for most incendiary bomb mixtures, in the same way that all jacuzzis are hot tubs, but not all hot tubs are jacuzzis, the original mixture was, according to HowStuffWorks.com, quote, made from aluminium soap mixed with naphthenic acid from crude oil and palmitic acid from coconut oil. Not only can it burn at more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 2,760 degrees Celsius, its sticky, gel-like substance allows it to attach to almost any surface, making it incredibly difficult to remove or extinguish. Although introduced during the Second World War, napalm became particularly infamous during the Vietnam War, when it was used by US forces to burn huge swaths of forest where Vietnamese soldiers concealed themselves. The UN has banned its use on or around civilian targets, but as is so often the case, the United States has not officially signed up to this ban. Although biological weapons might seem like a comparatively modern idea, the use of communicable diseases against opponents in warfare goes back centuries. According to many historians, during the siege of Kaffa in modern-day Ukraine in 1346, the attacking Tatar forces, who had been suffering from an outbreak of the plague, used catapults to throw infected corpses over the city walls to even the playing field. Reports indicate that the tactic was incredibly successful, leading to the city's abandonment. It's also possible that it may have been far more effective than the attacking army could have ever imagined. There is at least one school of thought that suggests that those who fled the city may have transmitted the plague by boat to many other locations. But that's not the only example of this sort of thing. In 1495, the Spanish mixed blood taken from sufferers of leprosy into wine that was then sold to French enemies. Obviously, biological warfare has advanced significantly since then. The idea that individuals or groups could use biological agents such as ricin toxin or anthrax spores in a large-scale attack is one of the many things we're constantly warned to remain vigilant about. The biggest problem with such weapons is that they are even more unpredictable than the cluster bombs that we spoke of earlier. Once one of these agents has been released, its spread is entirely dependent on weather conditions. In dry, windy environments, attacks of this nature have the potential to spread over hundreds of miles, with the added problem that it can be exceptionally difficult to decontaminate the affected areas later on. In fact, biological weapons may well have the potential to be the most horrific weapons of all time.